Summary. Izuku talks to his supervillain father every once in a while. Today's episode is on a train. Izuku could feel something in the wind. Now, any sane person would just tell him it's the rush of air following the trains. He was at a train station after all. Izuku would blush, laughing it off. He'd tell them they were probably right. He was just being stupid. But, deep down, he could feel the energy in the air. Something was coming, and something was going on. There was an adventure waiting for him, and it all started with this train. Izuku had somehow convinced his mom to let him do a 2-week intensive course at Chiketsu High as an exchange program. Half of 1A was going, alongside half of 1B. Students were all expected to be at their destinations by 6 a.m. tomorrow. UA, of course, had paid for the train fares, housing, and food expenses, much to Ochako's relief. If they hadn't, Izuku would have nudged All Might into giving an anonymous and generous donation. Speaking of Yagi, his hand had yet to leave his shoulder. Izuku held his mom's hand tight in his left while All Might hung on to his right side. They were acting like he'd dash away at the slightest sight of danger. Which he would, by the way. Izuku would not doubt that Yagi had pulled in some favors to make sure this area was crime-free so Izuku wouldn't be tempted to leave. Izuku glanced over at his mom. Tears were building in her eyes. Izuku knew how to read her. She wasn't sad at all. She just genuinely missed him when he was gone. He squeezed her hand gently, and she returned the favor. Inko looked up at her son with the light of love in her eyes. Anyone could tell just how much she loved her son. He was, well, the sun to her moon. The constant reminder of everything right about the world. "I'll be back soon. 2 weeks is nothing, Mom," Izuku reassured her with a gentle smile. "I know, honey," she said, the usual lump in her throat. "But 2 weeks for you is 2 days. It's 2 years in Mom years, you know." Izuku laughed and enjoyed the moment. They had their ups and downs, but Izuku enjoyed every moment where he could feel the warmth of her love. At the end of the day, Izuku knew he was always loved. "It's 2 years in teacher time as well," Yagi pitched in, shaking Izuku lightly. "You have a habit of getting into trouble, you Prince of Chaos." "Prince of Chaos? I'm not chaotic. It's not my fault that stuff happens in front of me." Izuku defended himself, turning his head around to yell at his mentor. "You ran after the hero killer. Mom, that was—" "You ran right into danger with the Shihasakai." "Eri needed help. I couldn't just—" "The point is, dear," his mom said, pulling his attention back, "we worry about you. Please keep us updated. Stay safe and remember to eat right and sleep, Izuku. I don't care what kind of notes they have you taking. Sleep." "Yes, Mom," Izuku said genuinely. The two of them would probably have gone on and on about taking care, but for once Izuku had good luck. The sound of the train coming drew all of their attention to the tracks. It was coming around the corner. This was it. Izuku let go of his suitcase to hug his mom properly. She held him borderline hostage all the way until the train had pulled to a stop. Izuku took in the smell of her shampoo and the softness of her hair. He noted the soft knitted sweater she wore and the way she had to reach up to hug him. One of these days he might not get to hug his mom again. He took every blessing he could get. Izuku eventually pulled away, leaving his mom to softly cry. He was pulled into a quick but strong hug by Yagi. Izuku chuckled and hugged tighter. Yagi pushed him off gently and patted his shoulder. "Seriously, kid, stay out of trouble. You're representing not only UA, but everyone you've trained with. Show him what plus ultra means, yeah?" Izuku lifted his hand up for a fist bump. Yagi obliged. "Plus ultra," Izuku parroted. He grabbed his suitcase and took off towards the train. He had no doubt that they would be at the train station at least 5 minutes after his train left, just to make sure he was okay. He would always have the support of those two. Izuku pulled out his ticket from his jacket pocket and handed it to the worker. They thanked him, and Izuku went to sit in the economy section. Izuku put his carry-on in the designated area and settled into his seat. He watched out the window as his mom and Yagi waved at him. He returned a little wave as the train started to move. It would be a decent trip. It was an overnight trip to the other side of Japan. Izuku had prompted for the economy class, even though first class was offered. He was more comfortable with people around him. Izuku was pulling out his headphones when an attendant came by with a snack cart. "Hello, sir. Water and snacks are provided free by our company. Please enjoy." The attendant, a woman with snakes for her hair, cheerily said. She practically pushed the water and small protein bar at him. Thanks," was all he could manage to say. Izuku took the offered items and put them in his lap. It was nice of them to give out snacks. It was a long trip after all. Izuku put his headphones in and selected a playlist Jiro had made for him. She had made a playlist for everyone in one day going on the trip. Jiro was a total sweetheart covered up in punk alternative aesthetics. Izuku smiled at the thought of his amazing friends. He was looking forward to his trip. Who knows who they'll meet on the excursion to Shiketsu? Izuku watched the skyline of Japan rush by with ecstatic beauty. Sometimes Izuku was just captivated by the society around him. It wasn't perfect, not at all, but it was beautiful. It wasn't the architecture or technology that made it gorgeous, but the people. He thought of all the workers who built the city, the men and women who designed it, the families and people who lived in every street, every apartment that gave life to Japan. This is what he wanted to protect, not the money or tourist attractions, but the people who visited and worked at them. Every alleyway, restaurant, and neighborhood home, he wanted to save as many people as possible. It takes a village, and a village he would keep safe. Izuku tore his eyes away long enough to crack open his water. He took a few sips and placed it in the cup holder. He had been lucky enough to sit by himself in this row. Izuku relaxed back into his seat and watched the sunset over Japan. Slowly, his eyes began to droop. Izuku fell asleep slumped over on the window. He snored softly to himself, a look of peace on his face. It was cute. He was falling into a deep REM sleep. The attendant from earlier was walking past his row and stopped dead in her tracks. She looked down at the rest of the train cabin. There was no one else there. The silence was eerie. Swallowing, she abandoned her drug snack cart and took a peek at Izuku. He was asleep, just as planned. She stepped back over to the cart and opened the bottom drawer. She pulled out a phone. Quickly dialing the number, the other line picked up just as fast. "Sir, he's ready. Economy seat 1A. "Ah, wonderful. It's so like him to choose that seat. Sentimental." The deep voice said with a hint of adoration. "You can return to the cabin in the back. You will be transported to a destination of your choosing." "Yes, all for one. Thank you." Izuku, upon awakening, knew from the second he gained consciousness that he was somewhere different than where he had fallen asleep. UA had done wonders for his situational awareness. His past experience with hospitals, and not to mention PTSD, also threw his nerves into overdrive. He mimicked sleeping as much as possible, ignoring the nausea and headache. He was reclined in some kind of seat with a blanket draped over him. The air was cold, but not stale. There was a loud hum that he couldn't quite figure out, and a higher-pitched one of the fluorescent lights. It didn't feel bright, so they must be low lights. There was movement, and Izuku had to coach himself through Aizawa's voice, telling him to remember to breathe and move naturally for a sleeping person. No one was ever dead still unless they were dead. Izuku took a deeper than normal breath and moved sleepily towards his right side. He could hear more that way. It wasn't always smart to feign half-awake movement when in an unfamiliar environment, but it was his decision. He could hear the air and the rustle of clothes further down in the room. From the sound of it, the room was rather narrow. Not necessarily small, but narrow. A hallway? Not likely, but spaces can be adapted into anything, including hostage storage units. Izuku laid in wait, trying to gather any information possible. The more he knew, the better he could formulate escape. While he might not be tied down, that didn't mean shit about his level of freedom. For all he knew, there could be a bomb in his neck or more hostages in the room. Across from him, too close for comfort, the shuffle of someone readjusting in a seat and the flip of a newspaper. Izuku listened for another moment. His headache was becoming more apparent the harder he concentrated. Did he have head trauma? Izuku evaluated his memories. He had spent the weekend with his mom and Yagi. He had packed his suitcase to go to Shiketsu. He had said bye to his family at the station and got on the train. After he sat down, there wasn't anything else to remember. His body wasn't aching anywhere, so he assumed to have breathed in some components, or maybe even suffocated out. He didn't feel any bruising, but he also wasn't moving. Train. That's where he was. The narrow room, the hum, and the stranger completely too close for comfort. He was still on a train. There was no telling if it was the same one or where they were heading. He also had no idea how long he'd been out for. His limbs felt sluggish, but not bone-heavy. He'd slept well, so that pointed to drugs. The administration and dosage was next. If he assumed, "If you think any louder, I swear the rest of the train will hear it too." Izuku stopped in his metaphorical tracks. He opened his eyes with a squint. "You've never been good at fainting sleeping, son." All for One sat across from him in a first-class seat with the newspaper he heard, He had recently acquired his face back. As usual, he was dressed in one of his never-ending choices of suits. Izuku swore the man wore a new one every time. Izuku didn't startle at his gaze like other people would have. The man was a monster, an insufferable asshole with megalomaniac tendencies to kill thousands, and generally someone many feared, but Izuku was not just someone. Izuku was his son, and with that cursed privilege he knew what the man was like on an early Sunday morning. He was no more human than the rest of us. Like you know, deadbeat. Izuku huffed out with the normal amount of I'm the teenager and hate my parents attitude. All for One merely huffed back at him with a raised eyebrow. They'd had this conversation over and over again. Izuku made it clear that all night shaking his face off was not a good enough excuse for abandoning his family. All for One argued he literally couldn't move for up to a year. Izuku batted him back, and after that, which typically shut him up. You know, I was just theorizing why I had a headache, Izuku announced, slowly sitting up. This would be the worst time to get a muscle cramp. He rubbed his eyes, then looked at his father. But now I know you're here. Well, 'cause found. You have a headache? Thank you for the feedback. I'll make sure to let my pharmacist know, he said far too casually, leaning back into his seat. He would also try to play everything off as casual without actually addressing everything. If your first note is to let your pharmacist know that your drug specifically for drugging your son has side effects, then you've got the wrong priorities. Oh? All for One said, falsely intrigued. With a wave of his hands, he asked, what should be my highest priority? Because right now, my highest priority is my son. Exactly! Your highest priority should be your son. Yet here I am, dry throat and headache. Not a single, good morning, how are you? I hope school is going well, or how's your mother? Izuku said, spitting venom with the last one. All for One had the humanity to look uncomfortable at the mention of his wife. He swallowed and attempted to regain himself. Well, how are you? How is your mother? I was fine before the headache. Mom is as good as she can be, Izuku said simply. There wasn't much he wanted to give the bastard. If he wanted to know, he should have come home sometime. Though neither of them knew how Inko would react. His original concerns came back to mind, and Izuku looked out the window. The dark Japanese countryside stared back. Am I on the same train? I've got places to be. Yes, I moved you to first class. I don't understand why you insisted on economy when you offered first class by UA. His father drawled. He was a man of taste and class, and, in Izuku's opinion, a man of assholery. Speaking of economy, what about the other passengers? If you killed anyone here, I'm going to be so pissed. They're fine, Izuku. His father cut him off to his annoyance. All paid off to get on another train. There was no reason to cause a scene. Izuku relaxed back into his seat. This was going to be a long ride, a long conversation, a long explanation one day. You see, Izuku knew that All-For-One was his father. His mother knew who All-For-One was, but didn't know that Izuku knew. Poor Yagi and Tenko Shimura, he refused to call him Shigaraki, were completely in the dark. That bastard doctor knew, but no one else. No one else knew that All-For-One had a child, much less that his son was UA's shining star Izuku Midoriya. That meant 4 people in total knew about the complete clusterfuck he was in, and only 2 of them knew the whole truth. Izuku couldn't tell Yagi that All-For-One was here. That would raise too many questions. No one was hurt, and so far, Izuku didn't think that anyone else knew All-For-One was here. There were a few staff who were more than likely paying off debts or being paid off millions. Yagi would ask why they didn't fight and what they talked about. Now Masasu Kachi would get involved, and Izuku couldn't lie to him. UA would yet again have another tally added to their ledger of failure to protect students. Izuku had met his father a number of times after the Kamino incident. A few when he didn't have the face, and a few after he got it back. Izuku assumed it was the work of Eri, but he didn't want to think about the security breaches needed for that, and quickly just accepted it. They started with civil conversation, and had kept it civil over time, despite the urge to remove his face again. When he'd started being able to interact with One for All, he'd heard some things about All for One. After his first meeting with his father, conveniently in his favourite bubba tea place, he talked to the messages that night and freaked out. After about the 4th meeting, he waltzed right up to his uncle and asked, Why is he like this? And received a shrug and a pat on the shoulder. Over 200 years, and not one person could figure out a term for the kind of fuck around and find out that his father was. But, his father started, setting his newspaper off to the side. He set his head resting on his right hand and stared him down. How are you, Izuku? Can you not send a text like a normal person? Izuku asked with a twirl of the hand and building annoyance. Not when this is better than a text. Izuku was a responsible, reasonable person. His mother raised him better than to risk thousands of lives by attacking his father at full force for being a dickhead. Izuku was raised by a wonderful and loving mother he would like to see normally and not from behind bars of Tartarus for killing his father. Fine, Izuku harshly breathed out. I was hoping to have a good, fun, relaxing trip, but I'm starting to think that won't happen. I finished all of my UA homework beforehand. I'm just waiting for trouble to happen, which, by your appearance, seems to be on its way. You seem to get in trouble quite often, his father noted with a tinge of disapproval. If you say it's because I want to be here, I'll break this window and jump out. Izuku glared at him. It's typically because your people are targeting me. Staying wasn't mine, and neither was Kaishizaki. You walked into both of those yourself, son. Izuku tried not to huff like a child at his insistence of calling him son. He was not a 5-year-old, but his patience got thinner every time he did this. Izuku was sure that he knew it made him angry, but his father didn't care. He had some fucked up idea that what was his, no matter what the person might say. For example, see Izuku Midoriya, Yoichi Shigaraki. You were dealing with both in some way. You were guilty by association. If I was guilty by association, then I'd be to blame for every villain you've ever seen. I'm glad we agree, Izuku said with a tight smile. His father did not feel the same vindictiveness as he did for the situation. All for One hadn't stopped staring him down. Izuku was a puzzle to him, one he was always trying to solve. Izuku would change his pieces and methods every time to throw him off. He couldn't allow the man back in his life. He had already slipped in the back door. No reason to let him sit on the couch of his house. You can't blame me for every bad thing in your life, Izuku, he argued, a harsh tone in his voice. Oh, I don't, Izuku admitted. After all, the truth hurt the most. I just blame you for most of it. You've got to admit, you could have done better. For example, Izuku, being in my life, not prioritizing work over family, getting to know your son, not being an asshole. Izuku kept smiling as he read the man for filth. It wasn't because he was happy, but because All Might taught him how to put on a smile when he was scared. And Izuku was very scared of breaking open. Izuku was glad to see the strained look on his father's face. If he was focused on his own emotions, as he usually was, Izuku could once again avoid the conversation of what was really bothering him. All for One took a deep breath, and for once in his life looked apologetic. Izuku doubted he could ever get a real apology out of him. He would express sorrow, but never actually progress towards an apology. He could never admit he was wrong in something. His uncle had confirmed that he had always been this way, an old dog trying to learn new tricks. Well, his father said quietly, I'm here now, and I would love to know my son. Izuku sat on the words. He swallowed down his daddy issues. This could be helpful for heroes in the future. He just has to put his own feelings aside and play the game. There was a connection the heroes might need. That was more important than any of his own issues. What do you want to know? Izuku said tersely. All for One relaxed some. Anything you feel comfortable sharing. Those were bold words from the world's biggest stalker. He knew everything practical, but nothing about the inner thoughts and workings of his son. An old idea came to Izuku. What about this? Izuku said, leaning back in his seat. He pulled his legs up so he was almost balled up in the seat with his head leaning back. I share something about me, and in turn you share something about you. That way it's fair. And before you complain about it, you need to understand I know next to nothing about my father. I'm not asking for state secrets or whatever, and I expect you not to ask me the same. That's very diplomatic of you. Not very casual. You haven't given me reason nor space to be casual. We're in public, Alderman tried to justify, gesturing towards the train. Is the public here? Is the public in the room with us? Fair enough, All for One conceded. Since you've expressed annoyance at being removed from your normal activities, I'll bite the bullet and go first. What would you like to know about me? Izuku wanted to throw up the word me, but kept a straight face. He was being uncharacteristically cooperative today. Maybe it was because Izuku was being more bold. Something outside of him may be affecting him. Maybe he had lost his favourite watch and was softened by the loss of something so important to him. Or maybe it was just the fact that they were talking about him, the egotistical bastard. Izuku cleared his mind of any hurt or hero-like thinking. This had to work as Izuku and Hisashi, as deadbeat father finally trying, and abandoned son who was hurt beyond compare. What would Izuku, as his son, like to know? There were thousands of questions running in his head, but there was one that satisfied the hero and son category. It might be a sensitive topic. This might be a sensitive topic, I have no idea, but if it is, let me know and I'll ask another question. This is meant to be personal. Still, all for one seemed hesitantly curious, but not at all the same. Izuku felt embarrassment, as he couldn't find it himself to look him in the eye. Izuku moved his gaze to the winding countryside of Japan. What were my grandparents like? Izuku could only watch out of the corner of his eye, but his father stiffened. He hadn't been expecting such a personal question. He seemed to think it over, opening his mouth and closing it. Izuku's nerves grew with every second the train was quiet. He was going out on a limb here, and he was hoping it wouldn't snap under the weight of the world on his shoulders. Izuku had struggled with the reveal of who his father was. First was the impact of his father being the world's worst villain for the past 200 years. Then it was the fact that his father was 200 years old. Izuku had always felt out of place, with bits of himself not quite matching up with everyone else. He had his extra joint, wisdom teeth, an appendix, and a few other things that were considered outdated in the human anatomy. He had always felt different, and now he knew that he was undeniably different. He was from a whole other generation, one that had died out years and years ago. Izuku was alone in his existence, other than said supervillain father. He at least ought to know where he came from. I suppose. His father broke the silence suddenly, Izuku flinching at the sound. I suppose it makes sense to want to know where you came from. They weren't particularly good or bad. They mainly left us. Izuku's heart panged alongside the shifting of one for all under his skin, alone to our own devices. We had a home and we were fed, but they didn't really care outside of that, unless you were talking about something they were interested in. After. Izuku watched as his father took a breath and clenched his hand tightly. Izuku didn't mean to bring up bad memories, but it was something every kid knew. He wanted to know too. After your uncle's health improved as we got older, they seemed to be done with us. They had spent so long fretting over every gust of wind towards them that by the time they needed to actually raise their child, they didn't seem to have the energy. So, Izuku said quietly, finally looking at his father, you did it. So I did it. All for one parroted. One for all hummed in his chest, letting him know it was the truth. It wasn't loud or shaking his hands, but the way you could sometimes feel the blood rushing through your veins. One for all was being very defensive about the situation, as Yoichi admitted he didn't exactly approve of them meeting. It was out of precaution and fear, but Izuku assured Yoichi that he was being careful. He also told him in the politest way possible that it was his choice to know his father, to which a few other vestiges got upset, but it was the truth. If he wasn't going to save him, who would? Thank you for telling me. You are very welcome, Izuku. There was a beat of silence before his father felt comfortable enough to ask his question. I'm not making this about business, it is a general question, he announced, and before Izuku could sigh, he kept going. Why Yue specifically? Why not Shiketsu or Ketubutsu? All of them are good options, but I was wondering what your reasoning was. Izuku hummed as he considered the question. It had been 2 seconds, and he was already pushing the no business rule. However, it was a good question. It would reveal Izuku's priorities and his education. If he was being honest about it, and for some reason he planned to be, it would also be very personal. Izuku knew exactly why he chose Yue. I chose Yue because I thought it would be the best. They have a rounded staff from very public heroes to underground to rescue heroes. They make students take all normal courses like maths, foreign languages, and even home economics. Other schools might have some of those classes, but not all. Yue had the resources to not only make a well-rounded hero, but a well-rounded person. His father hummed. You said thought. Is it different from what you expected? Izuku looked down at his hands. He looked over the scars and how he had gained them by saving others. They were very different from the scars on his back. The gruesome burn pattern marred his skin on his shoulder and spine. They sizzled with old anger at his turmoil. Everyone is naive in something. Yue makes heroes better statistically, but they can't make better people. They just hide it better. You went in thinking it would fix someone else for the better. His father noted with a curious yet menacing tone. A little, yes, Izuku admitted, knowing his father was thinking of one Katsuki Bakugo. But I was also hoping it would fix me for the better. Izuku, there wasn't anything wrong with you in the first place. Izuku had to slam the gates down in his mind from the flood of self-loathing he was feeling. His father wasn't in his life, so he couldn't have ever known that everything was wrong with him. He was a weak, useless lump of a person who only ever inconvenienced people in a desperate attempt to be something. His father had to have known. He'd been stalking him for years at this point. He knew how pathetic he was. All those years of watching heroes from the side, following them like they had the answers to everything, hoping that if he watched and mimicked them enough, he would be something more than what he thought he was. He wanted to be anything at all, but you can't create something from nothing. Yes, there was. His father was silent for a minute. He sighed and thankfully chose the safe route. If that is what you believe, I am glad you are agreeable with your growth at UA, he said quietly. It was a way of saying he absolutely did not agree, but would not argue at the moment. I know your mother would argue that point. Thank you for telling me. Izuku took the peace offering and nodded in appreciation. Izuku thought of his next question. What was personal, not work-related, and also not personal towards his father? It needed to be information for Izuku's sake, not his father's ego at being seemingly interesting to Izuku. He was interesting. Izuku wished he could ask him a billion questions, so many whys and hows and not enough answers, never any real answers. There were a few he could ask. One rose above the others. It was personal to Izuku, but technically not about him. It was almost a funny question, if not for the dire implications behind it. It also might just put his father on his ass. He'd wait for the response and savor the awkwardness. Am I your only child? Izuku asked, looking directly at the man, no apparent emotion on his face. All for one froze in place, facial expression and all. The man had blue-screened at the audacity and genuinity of the question. It was a valid question. 200 years of life, and his mother just so happened to be the only woman he'd ever been, involved with. Izuku wouldn't be surprised if he were somewhere down the line. It took a moment, but his father returned to consciousness to answer. Yes, Izuku, you are my first and only child. He answered gruffly. Izuku had definitely thrown him off his game. Victory. Izuku impishly smiled. He was too within his mind and too ignorant to see that his smile was a direct copy of his father's. All for one stared back at the smile that was his. Eyes brilliantly green, one for each of the people he loved and in some way had lost. Izuku had Yoichi's inquisitiveness, that endless curiosity getting him in trouble. Inko shined through the sun from the green in his hair, the gentleness of his scared hands, the polite manners he displayed. Izuku was his only child, and the most perfect child he could imagine. He was all the good in his world. Would you have liked to have siblings? Izuku's eyebrows raised in consideration. He thought it over, humming into his hand. No, I don't think so. I wouldn't actively ask, but I wouldn't be opposed either. I think it would be weird, though. Weird how? It's just like... Izuku paused to sit up straighter so he could talk with his hands. The idea of having someone being made of the same things as you, but rearranged to be completely different is weird. Like, being assigned a friend at birth. You obviously know that sibling can be completely different. One for all hummed readily in agreement under his skin. And that's so weird, like, hey, here's this person with the same genetic parents, but also is not you. You have to survive together now. Best of luck. Izuku ranted on, eliciting a small chuckle from his father. It's one of those things you have to experience. It's a bond that no one can explain. You've had the luxury of never having to share a bathroom. So? Oh my god, his father frustratedly enunciated, dragging his hands across his face. Your uncle used to take the longest showers known to mankind. I swear he would take a 2-hour-long shower every day. If you needed anything, you had to wait those 2 hours. You had to go before him or he would use all the hot water. Izuku tilted his head in confusion. How could you use all the hot water? Oh, his father commented, face falling into consideration. I suppose you wouldn't know. Hot water is an on-demand thing now. In the past, you had to have a water heater, and it only held so much at a time. So if one person used all the hot water, or you were using the dishwasher, you were condemned to a cold shower. Is that why you're fucked up? Cold showers freeze your brain or something? All for one laughed and tossed his head back. Oh, maybe. Wouldn't doubt it. Does wonders for your hair. He hummed to himself for a moment. That was something I was wondering about you as you got older, he said quietly. It wasn't somber, but closer to melancholic. What? You were wondering about what? Izuku asked, leaning forward in his seat unknowingly. The expectations his father had were usually grandeur and completely batshit insane. He wanted to know if he was also held to impossible standards. His father smiled. Not the intimidating one, but the tiniest bit of pure joy he had seen from his father. It wasn't a threat, but something he found genuine joy discovering. My hair wasn't always white, Izuku. Neither was my brother's. Izuku about damn near jumped out of his seat. His jaw quite literally dropped as his eyes tried not to bug out of his head. He reeled himself back and roughly threw himself back into his seat with all to focus on his father. He could feel one for all under his skin hesitantly admitting he was right, and the rest of the vestiges in uproar about it. "No way!" "Yes, way, Izuku," his father mimicked, bringing a hand to curl around a lock of hair at the base of his neck. "It started bleaching when I was 15, 16 maybe. I wasn't fully white-haired until about 20. Yoichi started bleaching much younger, somewhere around 5 or 6. His, I imagine, was natural, while mine was more than likely stress-induced. Your mother knew, and we had always wondered if it would bleach out as he got older." Izuku considered the way he looked. Scruffy, normal-looking Izuku Midoriya. Messy curls of green and a short stature. He had gained more muscle and a wide stance over the past 2 years. If he had been a bit taller, his hair a tad paler, he wondered if the resemblance would be noticeable. The thought was foreign and uncomfortable, shifting like sand between his fingers. The deep curiosity of being like his mysterious parent, and the anger of ever considering the thought battle. Izuku let the war rest as something else caught his attention. "And your hands? Were they the same?" Izuku asked. His father lifted his hand to take a glance at the palm of his hand. The only visible sign of his quirk stared back at Izuku. It was mocking him in some way. He couldn't figure out why. "I don't know if that's like a hole or a pore or what, but were you born with it? Or did it just show up?" "Oh," All for One dumbly said, staring down at his hand. He whipped his head back to Izuku. "No, these just showed up," he announced far too casually. "You say that like that's not the most horrifying thing I've ever heard." Izuku cringed to him. "Did they, appear while you were sleeping? Please don't tell me you were awake. That had to hurt." His father shrugged. "I was indeed awake for it. And yes, it did hurt, but only for a short time." Izuku stomached his horror. "I know you've seen some very unsightly things, done even more, but you have to admit that is terrifying," he said astutely, his hands pressed together like he was trying to teach a child. "If you were going to develop the same, you would have done so by now. Unless the stressor triggers a sudden genetic development, you won't have to worry about the skin of your palms falling off." "Oh, God," Izuku said, shaking his head and closing his eyes for a moment as a shiver ran down his back. "I'm going to mentally puke. What the fuck?" Apologies for disturbing you, but if it were to happen, you should know." His father apologized for the second time today. He must be planning on doing something terrible later. "Yeah." Izuku breathed it out in a sigh. Izuku had met his father one-on-one a multitude of times now. Most had been very tense, with Izuku on the edge the whole time. The beginning was horrifically awkward and threatening. It slowly got more casual, by which he meant Izuku started feeling free to call him out on his bullshit. His father wanted to be a father, and Izuku wanted to be done with him. It was always unsettling. Contact was always either being drugged or found in public. Meeting his father wasn't something he had ever really actively wished for, but now that he had, it was a nuisance. Mostly, at least. Izuku had noticed the extra cash found in the side of his pocket of his bags. Crime on his route home and around his mom's house was always low, no matter where they lived. He had in fact paid his child support monthly and on time. He was trying in all the wrong ways, but god damn it, the little kid in him saw that he was trying. Izuku, for all the abuse and horrible people he had seen, could give credit to anyone who was at least trying to do better. And maybe that's where his father was the most manipulative. Everyone loved a redemption arc. But was his father actually trying to redeem himself? As a villain, hell no. As a father? He would have to wait and see. Izuku would come to think of this moment over and over later. He would lay in his temporary dorm at Shiketsu and stare at the ceiling, wondering what the hell came over him. Him and his loud mouth always getting into trouble. Would you leave again? The train continued forward at impossible speeds while the car they were in froze in time. Izuku's question, spouted from the 5-year-old waiting on his dad to come home, hung in the air. "Now?" his father asked, completely devoid of emotion. "Then, if you could go back in time and know what would happen, would you still leave that day?" Izuku waited. He listened to the humming of the train and a faint whoosh of the air conditioner. His father always liked it cool, as he was always warm. He'd always thought it was just from having a fire quirk, but maybe it was just because he was tall. Izuku didn't know. Izuku didn't know much about him at all. "Yes," his father stated to Izuku's disappointment. "I am not one for lying. I would. If I had the knowledge that I have now then, things could have ended very differently." Izuku humorously laughed and wiped the smallest tear from his eye. "That is a very you answer. I know that even without really knowing you." he admitted, shoving down the ache in his chest. He knew he wasn't worth it. He wasn't worth a handful of rice. I do regret my absence in your life. Truly I do, his father explained, a tightness in his chest. He didn't want to admit it. Sometimes I crave to do it all over again, but over centuries and endless amount of quirks, I've yet to find any way to do that. If only things were different, Izuku offered, letting the shame of being close but never enough seeping onto his shoulders and into his bones. If only, his father confirmed. Izuku wondered if he had ever felt any shame. Izuku looked out the window. It was his only escape from facing the person who hurt him the most, the person he craved to know everything about and burned to the ground within the same breath. It was dark. Izuku hadn't a clue what time it was, but he assumed the sun wouldn't be up for a while more. Izuku thought on Hizashi Midoriya, businessman, husband, father, and supervillain. Hizashi had, hundreds of years ago, fought with his younger brother about what it meant to be good or evil. He had tried in his own fucked up way to protect his brother and lost him in the process. He'd tried locking him away and even giving him a quirk to help his health. He was someone with tough love. Maybe his mom would have softened him up. Hell, if they'd gotten married and had him, she already had. A small family, quiet life. There were too many maybes in his head about if he had ever cared about them, or if leaving was self-sabotage, or even an impulse. I think he could have tried harder, Izuku admitted, still looking out into the dark. I know that sounds naive or entitled, but I'm your child. He broke to look at his father. Izuku took in the look of his face. He was listening, for once. I will ask the impossible of you, and you're supposed to make it happen. Now I don't ask for anything. Are you going to do anything about that? All for One stared him down. Izuku might have been the second or third person in history not to flinch when within his sight. Anyone else would see All for One glaring down at them, and quickly followed by the pissing of their pants. Izuku was not just anyone, so he instead saw his deadbeat father considering his options. When do you have a break in the next week? He asked simply. Izuku snorted. Then you don't have a copy of my schedule? I've been told it's polite to ask. Izuku barely held back a laugh. It was awful that he found that genuinely funny, but hey, you gotta get your laughs in some way. They were rare these days. Izuku hesitated. This could be sensitive information. He picked the safest option. I don't have anything on Sundays. Why do you want to know? There's a fantastic restaurant, a hole-in-the-wall place, really, nearby your temporary dorms. I'm conveniently available Sunday. Lunch seems appropriate. His father was incredibly tall with white hair. Izuku had always thought his eyes were cruel, a piercing red. He always liked to be dressed up and had a favourite coat he took everywhere. His father smelt of sandalwood and on occasion the lavender perfume his mother wore. He was always warm to the touch, and when the sun dared to shine in his eyes to blind him, he never blinked. Izuku remembered a warm hand on his back, guiding him to the playground. He remembers cuddling on the floor and watching cartoons until he fell asleep on the couch. He would doze for a bit, but always woke up when his mother kissed him and his father goodnight on the way to her night shift. Izuku would fake sleeping until his father picked him up and deposited him in his bed. Izuku took immense joy in the private bedtime ceremony and goodnight kisses. Izuku could not remember much about his father. The shards of memories he did have cut his hands from gripping them so tight. He only had scraps of his father, and in some ways his father only had scraps of him. Was this someone he wanted in his life? A murderous villain who had caused the deaths of thousands. He controlled the Japanese government and the underground criminal rings of the world. He was indirectly responsible for overdoses, murder, trafficking, abuse, and all kinds of crime. He damn near killed All Might, his teacher, his mentor, his only real father figure in years. What would All Might think of him talking with his greatest enemy like this? What would he think when he eventually found out that Izuku was the Demon King's son? The look of betrayal on his face before Izuku could ever get a word in would haunt him. It hadn't even happened yet, and it haunted him. His friends would throw all trust away and assume he was a spy. He'd be thrown out as a villain, cast aside. He was risking everything for a man who abandoned his son, his family. What would his mom think? She would think he had a good heart. Okay, Izuku said, straight from his heart, ignoring his screaming trauma. Lunch it is. Hizashi smiled, and Izuku swore if the man were a cat, he would be purring. Izuku yawned, blinking tiredly. Emotional trauma could sure tucker you out. He leaned back in his seat and stretched out. What time is it? Izuku called out, a deep breath making his back pop. After the rustling of fabric. 3:25 a.m. Feel free to sleep the rest of your trip. I'll be here. Izuku hummed and closed his eyes. While that wasn't exactly reassuring, Izuku had no doubt he would wake up in perfect health. He might wake up in better health than he was before. They had some odd understanding that during their father-son meets there would be no harm. Izuku didn't fully believe it, but the man couldn't have lunch with him if he hurt him in any way. Izuku let the hum of electricity lull him to sleep. It definitely was the comforting noise of someone working across from him. The small flips of a newspaper or the typing on a phone were just the background noises. No way they could be comforting. He ignored the familiar deep hum of thought from his father that reminded him of the tiger. One furl quietly leaked over his skin like water. Izuku was halfway to sleep as the quirk made sure he was safe. It knew how to stand guard for him. It was wasting no energy, just letting itself be known. Oh, hush, you, Hisashi chastised in a playful tone. I'm not going to do anything. Let him sleep. God knows he needs it. One furl zipped around in an almost playful manner. It sat on his skin like a perched dragon. Izuku didn't know that he needed to be comforted right now, but One Furl always knew. All Might had told him once that his mentor, Nana Shimura, always knew when someone needed a hug. Maybe she still had it in her to comfort her enemy's son. Izuku, finally, thankfully, drifted to sleep, safe and sound. Sir, you need to wake up. We're at our destination. Izuku groggily opened his eyes. The sunlight was way too bright, and he groaned at its audacity to burn his eyes. Whoever had woken him giggled at him, and he could feel the shift in the air as they moved away. He brought his hands up to rub his eyes. He finally got the courage to fully open his eyes. He numbly processed he was slumped over in a seat in what looked like a train seat. People from somewhere behind him rustled and spoke softly. Izuku took a deep breath, yawning on the exhale. He stretched and slowly moved to look over the back of the seat. Rows of people were also stretching and grabbing bags. He dumbly swallowed as his brain processed that his train made it overnight. Nothing had really happened, which was a new feel. His father. Shit. Izuku slumped back down in his seat and looked over his stuff. His backpack sat in the seat beside him, along with his headphones. Someone had kindly brought down his carry-on for him. In the cup holder was a half-drank water bottle. Izuku remembered the beginning of his journey, and squinted at the offending bottle. He had an afterthought. He had seen his father. He reached out into the smallest pocket on the outside of his bag. As usual, Izuku pulled out some cash and a handwritten note. Izuku shoved the cash in his pocket, because good God, that's got to be enough to pay someone's rent, and opened the note. Have fun this week. Listen to your mother. Sleep, Izuku. All my love in the stars above, Dad. Izuku took a deep breath. This was the first time he dared to sign off on his notes. Not even as All for One or Hisashi, but to start off as Dad. People started exiting the train around him. Izuku shoved the note in his pocket alongside the cash. He quickly managed to pull himself together. He threw on his backpack, grabbed the handle of his luggage, and started a goodbye to the attendant. Izuku stepped onto the train platform as he made his way over to some benches. He needed to look up directions to walk to Shiketsu or call a ride service. As he was typing it in, a text appeared from his group chat with All Might and his mom. Mom, did you get there okay? Was the trip over there fine? Did you sleep? All Might, I haven't seen anything in the news, so I'm assuming you're okay so far, my boy. Izuku, yes, Mom, All Might, I made it okay. Mom, so nothing happened, right? No villains? Izuku looked at his phone and almost laughed. Izuku, nope. Izuku, not a villain in sight.